And who is this?
Emperor Argall!
We carve no statues of other Viltrumites.
One of the most intriguing aspects of any fictional franchise is the obscure history of said franchise because it allows us to imagine what could have created the world we see today. Well, this video is going to be like that, except we do actually have a lot of information about our subject directly from the comics and the show. Emperor Argal never appears in Invincible, and he's only spoken about a handful of times, but still, his reign set the blueprint for their species and the future of the universe, because as those kids said in Invincible Season 4, Episode 2, he made the Viltrumites one, showed them their power, and gave them the stars. So, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the tyrannical life of the first Viltrumite Emperor, and spoiler warning, because there's going to be a lot of those. Let's get into it. The man who united the Viltrumites. Argall's rise to power. Viltrumite history is a bit of a mess because we get multiple versions of it and all of them seem to somehow contradict each other. The first version we're given is a complete lie, but that's evident because it comes from the World Betterment Committee. And you know what Viltrumites mean when they say they're making worlds better. Subsequent versions start hitting closer to the truth, especially when there are no filters involved, like Nolan's admission about the true numbers of his species, or that scene where he brutally fights his parents from Season 4 to prove that he's an adult now. But depending on who knows what and how much, tracking Viltrumite history becomes a headache. Yet, the one thing all versions have in common is the fact that the Empire started declining after their first glorious leader was removed from power. That leader was Argal, and he brought together a band of Superman knockoffs by giving them that Saiyan mentality. Argal must have had his work cut out for him when he decided to become emperor because, at the time, Viltrumite society was fragmented. They most likely existed in tribes and clans that constantly fought each other, because otherwise, why would he be remembered as a unifier? He stopped Viltrumites from taking their own lives and turned their battle lust towards the rest of the universe, which is why he's memorialized as a godlike figure. The Viltrumites usually don't carve statues of their people, yet Argal is the one exception, immortalized in stone, because like we mentioned in the intro, he united his people and gave them their existential purpose. Now, the fact that Argal became emperor, not king, doesn't tell us much about the details of his campaign to unite the Viltrumites, but it does tell us a lot about the path he might have taken. Emperors and kings have one crucial distinction. Kings rule over a set territory, but emperors have several kings, dukes, lords, and the like serving under him. So, our best guess is that he used a combination of strength, diplomacy, and wisdom to bring disparate clans together, because what good would strength alone have been had he used it to kill his people to prove his dominance? That would just perpetuate the cycle he was trying to break, and this is why the Viltrumites remember him as Argal the Wise. He may or may not have been the strongest Viltrumite of his generation, but he definitely was the one who used his brain for more than just battle. Argal's takeover consolidated and empowered a population that eventually numbered in the billions, and he ruled over them with such effectiveness that he's remembered as a great ruler thousands of years after his death. But here's the problem with that. Argal's wisdom was only wisdom for the Viltrumites. For every other species in the universe, it was a death sentence, because in his mind, the prosperity of Viltrum could only be ensured through one thing: the subjugation of everyone else. Cruelty disguised as wisdom. How Argal made himself popular and accepted. The unification of a species as volatile and destructive as the Viltrumites can only be achieved through two major pathways. The first is to beat them into submission. In a society where strength is valued as the highest commodity, displaying your power is the best way to ensure your superiority. But conquest breeds dissension, which breeds revolution and makes unending conflict. The Viltrumites call him Argal the Wise because, in their eyes, he was the wisest of them all. This means that he took that second path to unification, which is creating a common enemy for them to rally against. Argal used one of the oldest tricks in the book to bring all Viltrumites under his control, which is the otherization of everyone else. He convinced them that using their strength against each other was folly, when they could be using it to conquer other races and prove that Viltrum as a whole was the pinnacle of evolution. This clearly worked because Viltrumites were seen as a threat long before Argal's death. So, now that we've touched upon how he brought together his people, let's talk about how he unleashed terror upon the larger universe. Argall established the Viltrumite Council as part of his planetary administration. Think of this council like the small council from Game of Thrones, only it had a lot more members and a lot more committees underneath it. With the Viltrumite Council, Argall had a system in place to bring Viltrum's glory to every other planet in the universe, so he got to work on doing just that. What followed is remembered as the Golden Age of the Viltrum Empire, a time when all Viltrumites thrived and prospered under the leadership of their Grand Leader. We're not sure if the World Conquering Committee was established under Argall's reign, but a predecessor to it must have been created at the very least, because his successor doesn't change many things from his reign. If he did establish that committee, then he must have been the mastermind of the three-stage invasion plan that the Viltrumites perfect under Thragg. First, he'd send out his scouts, then he'd establish global watchtowers, and once dialogue was opened with the target world, he'd decide what to do with them based on whether they accepted Viltrum's rule or rejected it. Because Argall unified billions and turned them into a well-oiled military complex, technological progress on Viltrum exploded. Science reached a point where weather manipulation and gene coding became commonplace, and if a barren world was taken over by Viltrum, they could realistically turn it into a paradise within a year. This must be where certain quote-unquote moderate Viltrumites get their ideologies from, for example, Anissa. Now, yes, there's nothing moderate about Anissa as a person, but her broader thinking is perhaps the most progressive of any pure-blooded Viltrumite we've seen in the show so far. When Anissa attacks Mark, she doesn't want to destroy Earth, she wants to transform it and make it better. She keeps reiterating that a Viltrum takeover is what would be best for his primitive planet, seeing as they could fix all its major issues, including global warming, before the year was out. When Conquest arrives to follow up on her mission, he says that Anissa would try to convince Mark to join them using the practical advantages that being a Viltrum colony would give Earth. And this just tells you how deep the propaganda machine's influence was, even on Argall's own people. Sure, the only option he gave to those planets he vetted for conquest was death or subjugation, but once they did the latter, he improved their lives immeasurably. This must be why most Viltrumites remember him as being this benevolent, open-hearted monarch, and why Anissa doesn't really rush to reinforce her strength over those she's ordered to conquer, unlike Conquest. But the truth about Argall is revealed by the existence of one man, and his name is Thragg. Thragg was created by the Viltrumite Council to be the strongest of their species. He was trained and biologically enhanced since birth to be their greatest soldier. We're pretty sure this decision wouldn't have been taken without Argall's permission, so all of that begs the question, why did he need to create a super soldier from a species of supermen? Weren't they all above all other races in the universe? Well, we've already touched upon the answer, but we'll get into it a bit more. If you take away someone's freedom, no matter how weak they are, they'll always find a way to get back at you. So, the only way to ensure your survival is through ultimate strength. Argall's wisdom was reserved for his people. He didn't exactly rule over his colonies as a benevolent conqueror. He terrorized people on worlds that were several galaxies away from his own, and he inevitably ended up making enemies because of it. Thragg's creation was supposed to be his nuclear option, seeing as the threat of overwhelming strength would put down the fiercest of rebellions. However, the one thing he didn't expect was resistance from within his own ranks. Towards the unexpected final days of his life, Argall had managed to forge Viltrumites into a sword with a single purpose. All Viltrumites, regardless of their differences, were united by his leadership and teachings. They all unanimously believed that they held dominion over the universe. They just needed to revert their full influence as efficiently as possible. Argall was the one who put the seed of their might makes right mentality within their minds, because the Viltrumite obsession with strength predates everything else from their history. And he accepted all parts of his species, even the weaker ones, because he knew that for Viltrum to survive, he needed to thrive. He wasn't the one who instigated the Great Purge because he genuinely wanted all Viltrumites to prosper, and that's the only thing we'll say was good about Argall. But Thaddeus was the first Viltrumite to see through Argall's rational arguments and behold the truth. That he was just a tyrant using conquest as an excuse for slaughter. He saw just how brutally the off-world subjects of their empire were treated. He saw Argall's teachings for what they were, brainwashing on a planetary scale that somehow convinced people genocide was for the betterment of the universe. As a member of the Council, he had access to many of the Empire's high-ranking officials and top-secret plans, as well as a hotline to Argal himself. He had to basically fight against his conditioning while keeping it a secret, because loyalty was a cornerstone of Argal's empire. All Viltrumites were bred to be completely faithful to their race's grand purpose, and a single hint of disloyalty was met with harsh reprimands. Plotting an assassination in such a fanatical environment is extremely difficult, but somehow Thaddeus managed it. As soon as he drove that dagger into Argal's skull, he fled to Telescria, where he adopted a disguise and got to work on assembling the coalition of planets. Thaddeus's betrayal created a storm of chaos on Viltrum because the Council knew Argal was the only thing keeping everyone together. With his death, the Viltrumites would be out for blood and chaos would reign supreme. So, in order to keep things somewhat stable, they came to a decision. If blood was to be spilled, let it be the blood of those as weak as Thaddeus who saw it fit to kill their great emperor. Argal's assassination became a spark that galvanized the worst aspects of his Viltrum empire and changed the Viltrumites for a very long time. How his death changed everything for the Viltrumites. The first thing that the Council did was cover up the fact that Thaddeus killed Argal and fled Viltrum because they knew the effect this would have on their soldiers' psyches. Treason, even just a whiff of it, couldn't be allowed if they were to remain loyal after Argal's death, and talk of a traitor would only make matters worse. Extremely high-ranking officials of the Council, like Thragg, whom Argal had bred to be his iron fist, were aware of the truth, but the rest of the populace was kept in the dark. This is different in the show because there, the Viltrumites acknowledge Thaddeus as the betrayer, the man who committed the greatest sin in their society. This was probably done to show the new generation what the consequences of treason would look like, because Thragg made it his life's mission to find and execute Thaddeus. In the comics, the Viltrumites were simply told that Argal was gone, and in the aftermath of his passing, Viltrum experienced the Great Purge. The strongest of their species mercilessly slaughtered the weakest, and it's after the Purge that the brutal rite of passage we saw Nolan going through became standard practice. Thragg emerged from the bloodshed as the undisputed leader of their society. He was a fanatical follower of Argal who kept his liege's skull with him long after his demise and even talked to it on occasion. But he didn't prioritize wisdom as the new Grand Regent of the Empire. Thragg wanted slaughter. He was the one who shifted the Empire's focus towards outright dominance, turning Viltrumites into the strength-obsessed race that we know today. Thragg took Argal's might makes right philosophy and applied it to his own people in addition to outsiders, and the results cannot be argued with. The Viltrumites he led were more vicious than their predecessors despite being fewer in number. Thragg weeded out all those who slowed down his dominion and only retained people like Conquest who can take an entire planet by themselves if push comes to shove. He continued Argal's dream of proving Viltrum was destined to rule the universe, but under him, the Viltrumites became more militaristic. If there was ever an ounce of progressive thinking in them, it was now gone, and the only legacy of Argal's that ever mattered were his lost children. One of the reasons we know Argal must have been terrible is the fact that he was forced to hide his heir. He kept their identity secret, even from his own council, and sent all of them off to remote regions of his empire to prevent his enemies from finding his heirs. Argal must have known he had enemies both outside and within Viltrum, and he wasn't taking chances securing his legacy. Being a male primogeniture-based society during his time, Argal's eldest son was going to be his successor, and the only way to find any of his sons was gaining access to a secret list that he kept to himself. After Argal's death, Thragg was tasked with finding his heirs so the Empire could return to its former glory, but Thragg couldn't find the list, and neither did he come across any of Argal's heirs. For the first 1,000 years that he was Grand Regent, he made earnest attempts at finding both, but after that 1,000-year mark, he gave up on it because he had more immediate concerns, like ensuring the survival of his people. Turns out, Thaddeus hadn't just gone into hiding, he was planning an attack on Viltrum, and that attack came in the form of the Scourge virus, which we saw in Invincible Season 4, Episode 2. 99.9% of his species fell victim to this virus, and Thragg was left with about 50 able-bodied Viltrumites in the aftermath. He was forced to switch over to subterfuge as a means of maintaining power and break with some really long-established traditions. After the Scourge virus attack, the Viltrumites started allowing their soldiers to interbreed with other alien species. They also started enlisting the citizens of their many colonies for their cause because they needed to fill out their ranks. These two things are presented to us as a radical break from tradition which can only mean that Argal was the one who promoted racial superiority amongst his people. In his attempt to galvanize them, he must have preached the virtues of preserving the Viltrumite gene and forbidden them from taking any help from a lesser species. Thragg carried over this legacy until it became inconvenient for him to do so, and when he decided to break with tradition, he also gave up on his search for the heir. It's kind of baffling that he didn't realize that person was right under his nose all this time, but then again, his new focus was rebuilding his people's strength to their former glory, so he probably wasn't looking too closely at the genetics lab's reports. He turned vengeance into Argal's legacy, which he claims he'll fulfill when he finally defeats Thaddeus, and that is perhaps the closest thing to the truth. Argal is only thought of as a great leader because he was great to his species. When it came to everyone else, he was a horrifying, tyrannical, racist dictator, and Thragg just embraced that truth. If anything, his successors were the one who led the Viltrumites with true wisdom because they steered their species away from the path of subjugation and slaughter. But that's a story for another day.
Why does he deserve this honor?
He made us one. He showed us.
As for this video, we hope we were able to give you a holistic picture of the entire life of the first Viltrumite Emperor, because Argal might have been wise to his people, but he was a tyrant to the rest of the universe. But that's just our thoughts about him. What about you guys? Let us know your opinions in the comments section down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Invincible content. We'll see you guys soon with yet another video, so until then, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.